Welcome to the session on abnormal psychology, Module 2, Session 9. A quick recap. In the previous session, we covered the structure of personality, that is, id, ego, and superego. In this session, we will further understand the structure of personality through various examples. From this table, we can clearly see that the level of consciousness of ego is mostly conscious, and its function is to mediate between id impulses and superego inhibitions through reality principle and rational. The level of consciousness of superego is mostly preconscious. It works with ideals and morals and conscience, and it is mostly incorporated from parents. Level of consciousness of id is unconscious. It works with basic principles, basic impulses, pleasure principle, seeks immediate gratification, and it is mostly irrational and impulsive. Ego works with thoughts and perceptions. Superego works with memories and stored knowledge, and id works with fears, violent motives, unacceptable sexual desires, irrational wishes, immoral urges, selfish needs, and shameful experiences. Firstly, we will look into id. An increase in hunger or thirst should produce an immediate attempt to eat or drink. The id is very important early in life because it ensures that an infant's needs are met. If the infant is hungry or uncomfortable, they will cry until the demands of the id are satisfied. Young infants are ruled entirely by the id. There is no reasoning with them when these needs demand satisfaction. Imagine trying to convince a baby to wait until lunchtime to eat their meal. The id requires immediate satisfaction, and because the other components of personality are not yet present, the infant will cry until these needs are fulfilled. However, immediately fulfilling these needs is not always realistic or even possible. If we were ruled entirely by the pleasure principle, we might find ourselves grabbing the things that we want out of other people's hands to satisfy our own cravings. This behavior would be both disruptive and socially unacceptable. According to Freud, the id tries to resolve the tension created by the pleasure principle through the use of primary process thinking, which involves forming a mental image of the desired object as a way of satisfying the need. Coming to ego, in many cases, its impulses can be satisfied through a process of delayed gratification. The ego will eventually allow the behavior, but only in the appropriate time and place. Freud compared the id to a horse and the ego to the horse rider. The horse provides the power and motion, while the rider provides direction and guidance. Without its rider, the horse may simply wander wherever it wished and do whatever it pleased. The rider gives the horse directions and commands to get it to go where the rider wants it to go. Imagine that you are stuck in a long meeting at work. You find yourself growing increasingly hungry as the meeting drags on. While the id might compel you to jump up from your seat and rush to the break room for a snack, the ego guides you to sit quietly and wait for the meeting to end. Instead of acting upon the primal urges of the id, if you spend the rest of the meeting imagining yourself eating a cheeseburger, once the meeting is finally over, you can seek out the object you were imagining and satisfy the demands of the id in a realistic and appropriate manner. Lastly, talking about superego, the conscience includes information about things that are viewed as bad by parents and society. These behaviors are often forbidden and lead to bad consequences, punishments, or feelings of guilt and remorse. The ego ideal includes the rules and standards for behaviors that the ego aspires to. These two are the components of superego. Superego tries to perfect and civilize our behavior. It works to suppress all unacceptable urges of the id and struggles to make the ego act upon idealistic standards rather than upon realistic principles. The superego is present in the conscious, preconscious, and the unconscious. If the ego and superego interact and work together. When talking about the id, the ego, and the superego, it is important to remember that these are not three separate entities with clearly defined boundaries. These aspects are dynamic and are always interacting to influence an individual's overall personality and behavior. With many competing forces, it is easy to see how conflict might arise between the id, ego, and superego. Freud used the term ego strength to refer to the ego's ability to function despite these dueling forces. A person who has good ego strength can effectively manage these pressures, while a person with too much or too little ego strength can be unyielding or disruptive. What happens if there is an imbalance? According to Freud, the key to a healthy personality is a balance between the id, the ego, and the superego. If the ego is able to adequately moderate between the demands of reality, the id, and the superego, a healthy and well adjusted personality emerges. Freud believed that an imbalance between these elements would lead to a maladaptive personality. For example, an individual with an overly dominant id might become impulsive, uncontrollable, or even criminal. Such an individual acts upon their most basic urges with no concern for whether their behavior is appropriate, acceptable, or legal. On the other hand, an overly dominant superego might lead to a personality that is extremely moralistic and judgmental. A person ruled by the superego might not be able to accept anything or anyone that they perceive to be bad or immoral. Finally, summarizing the session, we understood how the id operates with immediate pleasure, ego operates with reality principle, and superego is the portion of human personality representing the conscience. Here are some references to explore these concepts further. Thank you.